440 million in annual economic benefit was forfeited. For comparison, the Super Bowl coming to the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul recently injected nearly $500 million into our local economy. Is denying a Super Bowl's worth of economic benefits to a region with significant Native American presence part of a just transition? NGS and Kayenta Mine provide long-term, high-paying jobs for members of the Navajo Nation and the Hopi tribe, and was a major power source for the region. The plant had 500 employees, with more than 85% being Native American, and the mine had over 300, 99% of whom were Hopi or Navajo. Is losing hundreds and hundreds of union Native American jobs with an average salary of $117,000 per year part of a just transition? This plant provided more than 2,000 megawatts of power to Arizona and surrounding states, accounting for millions of homes. Is cutting off low-cost power for millions part of a just transition? According to the superintendent of the Page Unified School District, closure of the Navajo generating station led to a loss of more than $750,000 in revenue from the plant's closure to February of 2020, due to no longer receiving royalties, taxes, permits and lease fees, and scholarships. Is depriving schools of hundreds of thousands of dollars annually part of a just transition? Closure of NGS forced the Page Hospital to lose $500,000, or 1/3 of its annual revenue. Now, the hospital has to choose between upgrading its surgery center or its pharmacy. Is making a rural hospital choose between its pharmacy and surgery department part of a just transition? My Republican colleagues before my time in Congress held a hearing on this topic in 2018, ahead of the closure of the mine and plant. They rightfully warned that the economic impact would be long-lasting and the jobs would be difficult, if not impossible, to replace in the short term. They were correct. These communities are still feeling the effects today. Our colleagues in the majority pay lip service to the notion of so-called just transition, while cheering along the closure of mines and power plants and calling for more unnecessary regulations designed to kill energy development and energy independence. Therefore, my Republican colleagues and I look forward to examining this problem with a lens focused on what justice really means: a reliable paycheck, funding for the community, and access to low-cost power. The keep it in the ground strategy of extremist groups will only continue this cycle of premature plant and mine closures, resulting in unemployment challenges that persist for years in affected communities. If we continue down this path, a so-called just transition will remain just out of reach, as these valuable jobs simply cannot be replaced, despite the enduring narrative from the Green New Deal Democrats. I look forward to discussing these important topics today, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Stauber. Would the Ranking Member of the full committee, Mr. Westerman, would you like to make a statement?
I would, Mr. Chairman.
You are Mr. Westerman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we come to another hearing with the title Justice in it, I'm thinking about what my colleague, Mr. Stauber, said. The definition of justice is to make right. There's nothing about these hearings that are making anything right. Justice means to bring things into balance. That's why we see the scales of justice often depicted with a blindfolded lady. But this is not about justice. This is really about injustice. It's injustice to the American people to put us at a disadvantage in the world. It's an injustice to the American people to put the burden of global climate change on the back of America, where we're only producing less than 15% of the world's carbon emissions. This is injustice to rural America, injustice to people who depend on producing energy for their jobs. and it's not going to do anything to benefit the environment. I really wish the Democrats would start looking at real solutions that are market-based solutions that actually make life better for Americans and make the environment cleaner and safer and healthier. And today, as the subcommittee discusses the important role that the states play in coal mining reclamation and challenges that have been presented by onerous regulations and premature mine closures across the country, we're looking at an issue that could be beneficial to Americans rather than being weaponized to just continue an attack on fossil fuels. Under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, or SMCRA, the states maintain primacy regarding the regulation of coal mining and reclamation activities with oversight from the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement. While our colleagues on the other side of the aisle advocate for more heavy-handed requirements from Washington that are designed to make it impossible to mine coal, we know that the states are in the best position to oversee these activities at a local level. To be clear, no one on this committee wants to see new abandoned mine lands created. SMCRA requires that operators clean up the land after they mine, and they must post a bond to ensure there are adequate funds to reclaim a mine in the unlikely event they are able to do so. Often wonder if members of the committee have ever had a chance to go out and see a mine, because these operators actually reclaim as they go by conducting contemporaneous reclamation once mining activities in a particular area of the operation are complete. Operators are able to restore the land for purposeful reuse even as mining operations are ongoing, opening up the land for grazing and other purposes. And quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, these reclamation sites that I've seen leave the land in better shape than the natural land surrounding it. We can all agree that responsible energy development requires restoring the land to the best condition possible. And there are countless examples of exemplary reclamation across the country. I look forward to discussing these important conservation practices with our witnesses today. We'll also hear testimony and discuss the fallout from the premature closure of the Navajo generating station, the Kayenta mine. These operations were economic drivers for both the Navajo and the Hopi tribal communities in the region, and the impact of these closures is far-reaching. The power plant and associated mine provided jobs and revenue for these tribes to this day have not been adequately replaced. Environmental activists call for so-called just transition for communities that have long relied on and benefited from energy production as a source of economic development. Yet they applaud as operations are shuttered and advocate for more energy and job-killing regulations. As we have seen with the Navajo generating station and the Kayenta mine, valuable jobs in the conventional energy sector cannot be replaced overnight. While the Biden White House claims without evidence that coal and oil and gas workers will easily get jobs in the alternative energy sector or reclamation, the facts just aren't on their side. For example, the largest sector of jobs in the solar industry is in construction, providing an average salary of around $54,000. In contrast, the most common job in the natural gas sector is in utilities, generating an average salary of over $85,000. That's a $30,000 pay cut per year for hardworking American families. Additionally, while reclamation is a source of job creation, the number of jobs available simply pales in comparison to the number of jobs supported by mining operations. This keep it in the ground strategy ignores the human and economic costs are inevitable when energy projects are eliminated by DC bureaucrats and environmental activists who I quite frankly question their motives on the environment, because the actions they take most often are contrary to helping the environment. We can balance environmental stewardship and responsible development of our natural resources, and I look forward to discussing that with our witnesses today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Westerman. I'm now happy to introduce today's witnesses. Ms. Mary Cromer is the Deputy Director of Appalachian Citizens Law Center. Chairman Ricky Nez is the Chairman of the Resources and Development Committee of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. Ms. Nicole Horseherder is the Executive Director of Tonish One Ane, the Navajo-led nonprofit organization which translates to Sacred Water Speaks. Mr. Kyle Wentland is the administrator of the Land Quality Division of the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. Mr. Ben Nuvamsa is the executive director of Kiva Institute and former chairman of the Hopi tribe. And finally, Mr. Joe Pizarczyk served as the director of the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement from 2009 to 2017. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will begin and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely use grid view so that they may, quote, pin the timer on their screen. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Ms. Mary Cromer for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair Lowenthal. My name is Mary Cromer. Chairman-person Lowenthal, Ranking Member Stauber, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing me to address the environmental justice impacts of coal's decline on coalfield communities. As I said, my name is Mary Cromer. I am Deputy Director of Appalachian Citizens Law Center in Whitesburg, Kentucky. My testimony here builds on my experiences over the past decade to illustrate the problem of coal mine abandonment as the industry is declining. Those experiences focus on the problem as it has occurred in Central Appalachia, but the same basic problem is occurring on the Hopi and Navajo reservations, as you will soon hear, and in other coal regions in the nation. And the problem is this: as coal declines, coal mining regulations are failing to keep up, and coal companies are increasingly abandoning their environmental obligations, leaving too little in bond money to cover reclamation costs. Without sufficient bonds, coalfield communities fear that they will be forever burdened with hazardous and unusable land and polluted streams. Immediate steps are needed to protect these coalfield communities. My written testimony recommends some specific steps that OSMRE should take immediately to address the problem. In short, the window is closing fast on the opportunity to ensure that the coal industry pays to clean up its own mess. The industry will never have more money than it has now to pay for reclamation. While coal mines still have operators with financial resources and CEOs that are profiting, regulators must use their enforcement authority to speed up the pace of reclamation the way SMCRA intended. If and when the enforcement leads to permit forfeiture, or if the company offloads its environmental obligations through bankruptcy, OSMRE must ensure that reclamation is completed in a timely manner and meets all of SMCRA's requirements. I first moved home to Central Appalachia to lead ACLC's environmental justice program in 2008. As the coal industry's decline accelerated, ACLC began to see more and more instances where companies were leaving mine sites untended. Calls came from people dealing with problems like landslides caused by ponds that had overflowed their banks and sediment clogging streams below mine sites. Those unmaintained sites were in violation of SMCRA. What we realized was that as the market for Appalachia's steam coal had declined, SMCRA's ratcheting enforcement system had just stopped working. As companies were no longer selling coal and expanding their operations, They were unmotivated by the SMACRA regulatory authority's ability to block them from getting any new coal permits or expanding coal permits until the violations were abated. And the SMACRA regulatory authorities seemed reluctant to trigger their ultimate enforcement mechanism, permit forfeiture. Permit forfeiture is the process by which the regulator can forfeit the permit and any reclamation bond and assume responsibility for completing reclamation. But because the regulators knew that they had failed to require adequate bonding, they were very hesitant to take any action that would push the company to abandon its mines. When Black Jewel filed for bankruptcy in 2019, we learned that it had functionally abandoned many of its coal mines years before. By the time it filed for bankruptcy, those permits had accrued significant environmental violations. And those violations continue to accrue during the 21-month bankruptcy process. We knew that those violations would increase the cost of reclaiming the mine sites and make the permits unattractive to new buyers. We feared that those mines would be left to the state regulatory authorities and the sureties to reclaim. Many of them were. In March, 33 permits were forfeited. Kentucky estimates that the cost of reclaiming just those 33 permits exceeds the bond amounts by over $28 million. And many more of Black Jewel's permits are due to be forfeited in September. I focus on the Black Jewel bankruptcy because we see it as an inflection point. Given the current market trends, we expect more coal companies to use the bankruptcy process to abandon their environmental reclamation obligations. OSMRE is a small agency, but it is critical for ensuring justice for coalfield citizens. I want to close by saying that perhaps what coalfield citizens need more than anything is strong leadership at OSMRE. The career employees at the agency need to be encouraged and allowed to do their job to protect coalfield citizens by ensuring that mine sites are reclaimed quickly and fully. Forcing reclamation of abandoned mine permits will put people back to work and will help rebuild and restore the coalfield's damaged land and waterways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cromer. The chair now recognizes Chairman Ricky Nez for 5 minutes.
Good morning, my honorable leaders. Yate Beneshnantai. Thank you, Chair Alan Lowenthal, as well as the honorable subcommittee members of the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources. My name is Ricky Nez. I'm a council delegate on the 24th Navajo Nation Council, which is the governing body of the council itself, and I chair the Resource and Development Committee of the council. The council, under the RDC, oversees the Navajo Nation's water, land, environmental protection, cultural resources, minerals, and economic development. And the Navajo Nation is comprised of approximately 399,594 Navajo citizens on over 27,000 square miles of land covering Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. There are 110 chapter community governments throughout the Navajo Nation, and they represent the local people's voices at the local level for what their needs are. As leaders of the Navajo Nation, we have to consider the impacts our natural resources have on providing jobs and revenue to the Navajo Nation today and well into the future. Our elected leaders of the Navajo Nation need to actively plan and prepare for a new energy future. Recognizing the Navajo Nation is blessed with a wealth of natural resources, including the critical minerals and rare earth elements necessary for achieving renewable energy transition. We believe we have the right and responsibility to develop and manage these resources. Thank you so very much for inviting me today to provide a perspective of our energy story, guided by the Navajo Nation's Energy Act of 2013 and the Navajo Nation's efforts to responsibly transition from a coal-based economy to a new energy future. To that point, Honorable Chair Lowenthal and members of the Natural Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resource, I cannot stress this point enough. Indian country and the Navajo Nation need to be at the table when discussing the energy future and transition of the United States. Today, our Navajo people have a household income of $20,005 a year, with an unemployment at a rate of 42% and 43%, which is well below the poverty line. This is terribly unfair considering the Navajo Nation holds tremendous energy resources. Simply put, the complex bureaucracy in our federal government often stalls progress and raises the cost of energy development on Indian lands, making it less competitive for investment, and new energy regulations are making it even more problematic for tribes themselves to tap into their resources. Back in 2019-20, the Navajo Nation Council voted to close and decommission Navajo Generating Station and the Kayenta Mine. Today, our people did at that time use coal from the Navajo mine to heat their homes. Each winter, Intech, Navajo Transitional Energy Company, operates with the community's heating resource program, which provides free coal to community members to heat their homes. And also, Navajo Energy Transition has been awarded one of the top awards for having an outstanding also coal mine. As you see, the Navajo Nation is doing its best to transition. More important, at the heart of these operations is the Navajo working family providing for themselves. I just want to thank you so very much, honorable members. And may God bless our great Navajo Nation and the great United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Nez. The chair now recognizes Ms. Nicole Horseherder for 5 minutes. Welcome, Ms. Horseherder.
Thank you to the members of this committee. My name is Nicole Horseherder. I am Navajo and I live on the Black Mesa my entire life. Coal once played a central role in Navajo Hopi economies, but that is no more now. Early in 2017, NGS owners made a financial decision to close the largest power plant in the West. At the same time, the Central Arizona project, for which the Navajo Generating Station was originally built, argued that it could purchase renewable energy at least $35 million less annually than by having to purchase it from NGS. I'm here seeking your help to ensure that the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation and Enforcement and Peabody Coal are held accountable for cleaning up tens of thousands of acres and restoring vital groundwater sources that were damaged by all the years of mining. Office of Surface Mining is supposed to be in charge of that process, but to date it has been completely unhelpful in ensuring that reclamation proceeds in a timely and adequate manner. They've allowed Peabody Coal to leave a mess at Black Mesa Mine, and they've taken no action to move along reclamation work at Kayenta Mine. OSM also has made it incredibly difficult for us to monitor the status of cleanup work. None of the records or documents that should be available to the public are online. We've had to hire someone to go to OSM offices in Denver to scan paper copies, and this is before COVID. Early this year, they finally gave us thousands of pages of documents all at once. We fear that OSM will bring this same sort of negligent approach to the renewal of Peabody's permit for Kayenta Mine, which expired last July. Peabody is pressuring OSM to rubber stamp a renewal of the permit for another 5 years. Peabody's financial condition is one of the main reasons we're so concerned. The company came out of its first bankruptcy just 4 years ago, and it barely avoided another earlier this year by cutting a deal to restructure hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. Peabody's CEO just announced he is leaving with a golden parachute that will pay him $85,000 a month as a, quote, consultant, quote. This is a company on a fast track towards insolvency. A pro forma renewal of Peabody's Kayenta Mine permit under such dismal finances would be disastrous for reclamation. It would allow Peabody to dictate what reclamation looks like and the schedule it takes place under, in all likelihood cutting corners to save money. It would also limit the liability of our people to participate in the reclamation process in anything but a token way. The Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act requires a significant mine permit revision anytime there is a major change in production. Going from 8 million tons a year to 0 certainly qualifies, but to date, OSM has completely dismissed the idea that a significant permit revision is necessary. This is not discretionary, so we're not sure why OSM isn't following through. In February, Arch Coal announced it was closing its Coal Creek mine in Wyoming. A month later, it submitted a notice of a significant mine permit revision because that's what the law requires. Kayenta Mine closed nearly 2 years ago, but OSM hasn't lifted a finger to require a significant permit revision. A significant permit revision is critical because it will allow for a comprehensive review of reclamation plans. It will require a whole of government approach with collaboration between OSM and agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Environmental Protection Agency. It will create a robust public process that will provide our people with a genuine opportunity to have a say in what reclamation looks like. Most importantly, it will require a comprehensive hydrological analysis that can document the major change that has been done to the Navajo aquifer by mining. Water levels in many wells are 100 feet or more lower than when they were pre-mining. Growing up, we had access to water from seeps and springs all over Black Mesa, and most of those have dried up and have stopped producing water. To get water, my family has to drive round trip 40 miles to Hard Rock to the Peabody lease area, 30 miles to the Hard Rock community well, or 40 miles to the Pinion community well. We, in late summer, have to wait in line for hours to fill up at any one of these community wells. OSM is complicit in helping to cover up mining impact on our water. They do this by playing games with data by using computer modeling instead of real-world water measurements. These models downplay the impact of mining and contort the data to put the blame for dropping water levels on Hopi and Navajo communities, and municipal use. But all you have to do is connect the dots between damage to the aquifer and mining to look at the wells. Measurements clearly show, for example, that since mining stopped at Black Mesa, nearby wells have started to stabilize. If our communities were the cause of the drops, then the water levels would surely be falling still. The law and the leases Peabody has with Navajo and Hopi require mined areas to be returned to us in as good condition as received. That includes restoring our vital water resources. We are asking for your help in ensuring that there are no more broken promises. Congress has the ability to help hold Peabody accountable and make sure OSM meets its trust responsibilities to the Navajo and the Hopi people. And the best way to do this is to require a significant mine permit revision before Peabody's permit is renewed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ms. Horseherder. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kyle Wentland for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Wentland.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Kyle J. Wentland, and I'm the administrator of the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, Land Quality Division. Thank you for providing the state of Wyoming the opportunity to testify today. Wyoming surface coal mines are unique nationally in size and scale. Wyoming manages approximately 86,000 acres of facilities in active disturbance and $2.1 billion of reclamation liability in a manner that protects the state and provides for responsible coal resource development. Wyoming has not had a post-SMCRA coal forfeiture since the program's stand-up in 1980. In addition to active disturbance, Wyoming has approximately 93,000 acres that are in one of 3 phases of bond release, and 53,000 of these acres are back in agricultural production today. Wyoming implements a full-cost bond reclamation bonding program. The accuracy of the reclamation bond calculation is cornerstone to limiting bonding risk. In Wyoming, reclamation bonds are calculated and adjusted annually as part of a required annual report and include an on-site inspection. The reclamation bonds are calculated using Guideline 12, developed by Wyoming DEQ in 1996. Guideline 12 undergoes annual updates and uses real-world third-party data for verification. The reclamation bond costs are structured as if a third party were required to complete the reclamation rather than the operator. Once the annual bond amount is established, the mine operator has 45 days to submit any bond adjustment. In 2014, as financial distress started to hit the coal industry, Wyoming began updating its bonding regulations. The need to take a new approach was reinforced by the coal industry bankruptcies in 2015 and 16. Wyoming revised and more sophisticated financial assurance rules were signed into law by Governor Mark Gordon in May of 2019. Currently, Wyoming bonds are composed of 86% surety, 13% self-bond, and 1% in other instruments. As Wyoming updated and tightened its self-bonding regulations, a natural shift towards surety bonding occurred. This transition carries risk, as the diversification is no longer spread across different financial instruments. A surety company in Wyoming must meet the requirements of the State Insurance Commission, the underwriting requirements of U.S. Treasury Circular 570, and the terms established in the bond by the state of Wyoming. However, as with self-bonding, all risk cannot be eliminated. Self-bonding has received considerable attention following the coal bankruptcy since 2015. Wyoming modified its regulations and established a 3-tiered risk approach that is based on a long-term investment credit rating. This makes Wyoming's approach the same as that of any financial institution extending credit or bonds. Under Wyoming's tiered approach to self-bonding, those companies with the greatest financial strength are allowed to self-bond a greater portion of their reclamation liability. Those whose credit rating places them in the 2nd and 3rd tier rating may self-bond at a lesser amount, and those with a lower credit rating may not self-bond at all. No mine operator is allowed to self-bond 100% of its reclamation liability, and even those with the highest credit ratings must use a separate bonding instrument backed by a third party for at least 25% of their total reclamation obligation. Wyoming's new regulations are more stringent than the federal requirements, as is evidenced by the fact that companies that qualified for self-bond prior to 2015 do not qualify under the new 2019 rules. In summary, Wyoming's experience with coal bonding has highlighted several notable points. Aside from cash, all reclamation bonding instruments have risk. Diversification helps to mitigate overall reclamation bonding. promoting diversification by supporting a portfolio of multiple financial instruments, provides useful flexibility to all markets. Sound and thoughtful regulatory requirements can mitigate some of the excess risk of the individual bond instruments. Stakeholder engagement prior to and during development of a regulatory framework secures consideration of more diverse and protective financial instruments, and cooperative federalism between the state and OSMRE ensures that the needs of individual states are met while adhering to the protective framework of SMACRA and the goal of reclaiming coal mines. Wyoming bonding regulations offer a viable blueprint for managing reclamation bond risk and mine closure. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have, and I yield back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wentland. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ben Nubamsa for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Nubamsa.
Good morning. It's a good day today. Thank you, Chairman Lowenthal, Ranking Member Stauber, and honorable members of the Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources for the opportunity to speak to you about the issues that have plagued my tribe and the Dene people for the past 50 years. My name is Benjamin Nuvamsa. I am Hopi. I am a member of the Bear Clan. I was born and raised in the village of Sangopavi on Second Mesa. I was raised in a traditional environment and received my traditional teachings and Hopi values, which I follow each day. As Hopi people, we have a sacred covenant with our Creator and our caretaker, Masao, to be good land stewards. And that is why we Hopi people are very concerned that there's virtually nothing being done to repair and rehabilitate our lands that have been damaged and destroyed by over half a century of coal mining at Black Mesa. I served as chairman of my tribe and have been involved in issues that impact our lands, our natural resources, our cultural resources, and our environment for a long time, even before my tenure as tribal chairman. Today, I address you on the lack of reclamation of our lands, mined by Peabody Coal Company for over half a century. The lack of reclamation has the deep and lasting consequences for my people, the Hopi Sino, and the Dene Nation, the Navajo people, the most significant of which is the irreparable damage to our primary water source and the Navajo aquifer, and the removal of the remains of our ancestors from their sacred burial sites. Black Mesa Mine opened in 1969 and supplied 4 million tons of coal to Mojave Generating Station in Laughlin, Nevada, before it closed in 2005. To deliver coal from Black Mesa Mine to the generating station some 273 miles away, Peabody pumped over 3 million gallons of our precious aquifer water each day, paying the tribe a laughable $1.67 per acre foot. That is 1.5 billion gallons or 4,600 acre feet per year of pristine Navajo aquifer water, the only source of domestic water for our people, the Navajo and the Hopi. Black Mesa now has been closed for over 15 years, and reclamation is still not complete. In my written testimony, I provided photos of the mined area, what it looked like last summer. A little has changed since then. The coal leases require Peabody to return the lands to the tribes in, quote, as good condition as received, end of quote. Kayenta Mine, this is exactly what happened about the scope and pace of reclamation at Kayenta Mine. Kayenta Mine opened in 1973 and provided 8 million tons of coal a year for the Navajo Generating Station, NGS. which was the largest coal-burning power plant in the West before it closed in November 2019. Cayenta Mine shut down 3 months before that, and in the nearly two years since, Peabody has made no progress reclaiming the land in gross violation of the federal law requirement of contemporaneous reclamation. There were more than 2,000 acres that were actually being mined when Cayenta closed. There are still more than 2,000 acres of mined lands that have not seen even the most basic steps of backfilling taking place. The pits, the piles, the mounds of overburden that were there when the mine closed are still there, as you can see in the photos. To make matters worse, Peabody has submitted an application to delay a majority of the work even longer than this, and then that is acceptable to us. This is not acceptable to us and should not be acceptable to you, the federal government. The Department of the Interior and OSM have a trust responsibility to our tribes, but so far the only thing we see is the agency OSM bending over backwards to facilitate the needs of Peabody, helping it get away with doing the least amount of possible in terms of giving our land and water back to us. Both mines are now closed after having dug up and damaged more than 20,000 acres of our land, lands that our people lived on for centuries, lands that we used for farming and where we raised our families. Now these lands are not suitable for habitation and are now unusable. And every indicator we have regarding reclamation points to the same thing that we have been dealing with for decades: broken promises and broken leases by Peabody and OSM. There should be trees and native vegetation growing, springs and seeps for wildlife, for growing corn, and for our sacred ceremonies. None of these exist today. Our ecology has been destroyed. Instead, we have moonscape lands. Mined lands have not been left in pre-mining conditions, as the leases require. In 2015, the Bureau of Indian Affairs wrote a letter to Peabody that his reclamation was, quote, inconsistent with considerable acreage remaining as raw, ungraded, and eroding spoils, largely void of vegetation. We're concerned that OSM and Peabody are shirking their responsibility to reclaim more than 35 square miles of land. We are concerned that Peabody Coal will be allowed to simply walk away without completing its reclamation responsibility. As we speak, Peabody is inching closer and closer to a second bankruptcy in 5 years. All it can and doing what all it can to delay the reclamation work. It is because of this situation that we come to you for your help to make things right. And the federal government has a trust and fiduciary responsibility to our people. It is Peabody's contractual duty and obligation to bring our lands to pre-mining conditions. Our people were promised that good things would come our way if we signed the leases. Our elders, the traditional leaders, objected to the leases, but they were overruled by the tribal council that believed in the federal government. I do want to point out, with the time remaining, I do want to point out that the most devastating impact to our aquifer. 3 million gallons of water pumped a day. And that is significant, and to the point that the aquifer may never be recharged fully. It's an irreparable harm and damage to our lands, affecting our domestic water sources and our ceremonies, and affecting our springs, and that is affecting our ceremonies. With that, I thank you very much, subcommittee, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Devamsa. The chair now recognizes Mr. Joe Pizarchik for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Pizarchik.
Thank you, Chair Lowenthal and Ranking Member Stauber and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify. When Congress wrote the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, no one anticipated the current industry collapse. Some parts of SMACRA do not provide OSMR and the states with the tools they need to effectively manage the current industry crisis. Things are a lot better than they were prior to SMACRA, but we have issues to address. Some states fail to effectively implement the law. OSMR is understaffed. The looming adverse effects of this crisis will continue to further burden disadvantaged communities and impede their ability to navigate the energy crisis. Congress can help. SMACRA established that coal companies are to provide the state with a reclamation bond to cover the state's full cost to reclaim the land if the company failed. The bond could be in various forms, such as a surety bond or cash. SMACRA also gives states complete discretion on whether to accept a self-bond instead of a full-cost reclamation bond. A self-bond is merely a corporate promise and is in essence no bond at all. The self-bonding rules require that when a company fails to continue to meet the eligibility standards, it must provide a full-cost bond within 90 days. Large self-bonded coal companies filed bankruptcy in 2015 and 2016. Based on what happened with the self-bonds, which the state of Wyoming had accepted, it is clear that the regulations that govern the use and replacement of self-bonds do not work and cannot be fixed. In August 2016, OSMR advised the states to replace all self-bonds. It is my understanding that more than $1 billion of self-bonds still exist. These states are either unwilling to accept the reality of coal's collapse or worse. Congress should ban self-bonds. States also have the option to not require full cost bonds, but instead to create an alternative bond system, also known as an ABS. And that system must achieve the purposes of full cost bonding. The alternative systems created by states suffer from a number of design deficiencies as well as implementation issues. The alternative systems typically look backward, tend to be based on the historic coal company failure rates, do not look ahead to what may happen in the near future or what happened last month. They are slow to react, were not designed to handle the bankruptcy of multiple companies with hundreds of coal mines. States with an alternative system should read the recent West Virginia audit report cited in my written testimony and have a similar audit performed by a competent entity. Congress should require the states to have their systems audited in a manner similar to what was done in West Virginia and then immediately correct the deficiencies. Failure to timely do so would warrant other action. States and OSMR also have their hands tied by the bankruptcy code and bankruptcy proceedings. The prevailing view is that bankruptcy proceedings should prioritize Chapter 11 reorganization over Chapter 7 liquidation. Coal companies sometimes exploit this predisposition of bankruptcy judges and lawyers in the code, and they dump their federal and SMACRA environmental obligations. It is a common practice for coal companies to extract as much profit from a mine as possible before they reclaim the land and fund pollution treatment. Assets are stripped away from the subsidiary, and underfunded subsidiaries are spun off into a new entity. These underfunded companies are designed to fail. When the company files bankruptcy, any mines that have a glimmer of value are sold to capital vultures for further exploitation and ultimate failure. It is often impossible for OSMR solicitors and state lawyers to overcome the bias of the bankruptcy professionals to the detriment of the environment, state alternative bond systems, and the surface landowners and local community. The bankruptcy code should be revised to prevent coal companies from abandoning their environmental obligations. The federal rules also allow a mine to temporarily cease operations indefinitely. All the mine operator is required to do is provide written notice to the regulator. The system is abused. The number of inactive coal mines is huge. The longer these mines are inactive, the more environmental problems arise and the more harm they do. States and OSMR should order every coal mine operator to reclaim every mine that has been active for more than 2 years. The coal industry collapse has significantly reduced the ability of states to help communities that have suffered for many decades with worthless abandoned mines and polluted water created by pre-law mining. This situation will get worse without action by Congress. Congress should reauthorize the AML fund and provide OSMER $10 billion for states to hire coal miners to restore abandoned mine land and polluted water. Productive land and clean water are the ultimate infrastructure. Thank you, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pizarczyk. And I'd like to thank all the panel for their testimony. I want to remind the members of the committee that Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions, and the chair is now going to recognize any members of the any members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. As I begin, it's a little overwhelming. The operative word to me is we are in a crisis, and these communities, and especially Indian country, have been really exploited, and it's a really horrible, horrible situation. Mr. Pizarczyk, a few weeks ago, several nonprofit organizations sued the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement over its failure to require stronger bonding requirements for West Virginia's federally approved surface mining program. Last week, an audit of West Virginia's coal mine cleanup fund found that it was massively underfunded. The president of the state Senate of West Virginia said that this could be a $1 billion problem for West Virginia alone. Can you tell us a little bit more about this worst case scenario here? What happens if OSMER doesn't step in and help fix the fund? What does that look like for the state, its resources, and for communities living near those closed by coal mines?
Thank you, Chair Lowenthal. That is a very important question under the circumstances. It appears to me that that $1 billion problem is the result of West Virginia leadership, or perhaps lack thereof. It appears that also from reports in the press that West Virginia is looking for a federal bailout, but the inadequately implemented bond pool is not infrastructure, and the Special Reclamation Fund deficit is due to implementation issues and not primarily due to the decline of the coal industry. It seems likely that if OSMER is not able to help the state work through this, that there will be civil litigation against the state, and it will be would be necessary to force the state to fulfill the obligations it chose when it decided to establish and create an alternative bonding system. Litigation will take time. People in the environment will suffer, streams will be damaged, landslides will occur, homes and roads will be damaged, etc. But I believe ultimately the state will be under court order to not allow the land and water to remain unreclaimed.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Horseherder. There's long been disagreements between coal workers, non-coal workers, environmental activists, and government officials over the Black Mesa and Kayenta mines and the Navajo generating station. Now that the mines are permanently closed, is there any hope for these groups to find common ground in charting a path forward?
Thank you, Chairman Lowenthal, for that question. I just want to just a reminder that now that the Navajo generating station and the associated Kayenta mine are closed, I think that the way that I would like for representatives to look at this is that our groups are often, and mine workers and anyone who lives on Black Mesa is interested in the same thing. My group is based on Black Mesa. We're all members of the Navajo Nation. We are neighbors to the Hopi tribe who live on the south end of Black Mesa. And that mine workers who have been working there all these years are primarily Navajo and Hopi members as well. At this point in time, with the current situation, I think that it's safe to say that we're all interested in the same thing, and that we're all interested in the land being returned to Navajo and Hopi people for Navajo and Hopi use as good condition as received. And I think that it's just reasonable and to put mine workers back to work. The better the reclamation is completed, the more jobs there are for miners who have been laid off. The best people to do reclamation jobs are the mine workers who have worked the mines, and we want to see them put back to work as quickly as possible. A significant mine permit revision will allow for reclamation to be done well by people who know how to do it best. A significant mine permit revision creates opportunities to set the parameters for mine cleanup. That includes using the mine's own workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to now recognize Ranking Member Stauber for 5 minutes of questions. But I'm going to have to leave at this moment to go to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And Mr. Huffman has agreed to step in and chair the hearing in my absence. Thank you, Representative Huffman.
I thank you, Chair Lowenthal, and I will recognize Mr. Stauber, Ranking Member Stauber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Hoffman. I would like to first allow Ranking Member Westerman to go before me. He does have a prior commitment, if that's okay with the chair.
Certainly. Ranking Member Westerman, if you're with us, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Huffman, I'm here and ready to go. Audio here, committee room. There we go. Thank you to the witnesses from being here today. You know, as I listen to the range of testimony from all the different witnesses, it's almost like we're hearing testimony on two different issues, and reading testimony on two different issues. Mr. Wentland, I understand you're in charge of environmental quality for the state of Wyoming, so that's a big responsibility that you have, where you're actually, out every day working to make sure that environmental regulations are met. And I know that Chairman Nez, I believe you are actually authorized by as a spokesperson for the Navajo. But as we look at the different issues around mine reclamation, you get this idea from one set of testimony that we've got these abandoned mines that nobody's taking care of, that the bonding system is messed up, that it's not working, and the environment's being destroyed. On the other hand, from Mr. Wentland's testimony, I believe in your written testimony, you said that there have been no Title V forfeitures in Wyoming. So, Mr. Wentland, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of maybe set the record straight and push back on some of the things that are happening in Wyoming, and tell the committee what's really happening on the ground. Are there really mines being abandoned? Could you add some more to that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer to that in a couple of responses here. First, Wyoming's annual report requirement is really key and cornerstone to the process, because in that process, we update and review the bond calculations annually. And as stated in my written testimony, they're structured such that a third party plus contingencies would do the reclamation in the event of a forfeiture. So we're confident in our numbers there, and we're confident in those calculations. And right now, we actively are reclaiming. The mines have always actively reclaiming. I may be unique in being able to answer this question because I've actually reclaimed 6,500 plus acres of Wyoming myself prior to taking the job that I'm in today. So these mines reclaim up to what is typically called the engineering safety factor, which where the active pit is, you can only load the spoils on the spoil sides of the mine so hard before they would fail and pose a significant safety hazard to the workforce. So the mines do that mass dirt movement and they reclaim as tightly as they can to the pits because it's in their best interest to manage those reclamation bond amounts and manage that business structure in their daily business. And we go out and look at that every year as part of our annual report. And there's also what's called an interim PMT created in our bonding process with Guideline 12. We go in and with that calculation of the bond, it's the current disturbance plus the next 1 year's disturbance. And then there's an interim topography created for that mass movement of the dirt, even in the event of a premature failure. So we already have a plan designed to do that reclamation if such an event were ever to occur.
And everything's on track. The bonding's in place, if I'm understanding your testimony correctly. I know Wyoming's a leader in mine reclamation, and I believe it was back in 2014 that Wyoming submitted proposed changes for bonding regulations. Who was the director at Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement during that time?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pisarcik was the director of OSM at that time, and that program amendment, for clarity, was to clean up the final issues of the stand-up of the Wyoming program. It was filed in 2014, and it was not approved until May of 2019.
So you were being proactive in trying to clean up mines, and all you got from bureaucrats in Washington were delays until 2019, which I think illustrates better than anything why it's important to let states do their job. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Southern California, Mr. Levin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you to my friend, chairman of my other subcommittee. So it's nice to see you chairing this one in Chair Lowenthal's stead. Ms. Cromer, we've heard about a number of coal companies at which the executives give themselves large bonuses just before filing for bankruptcy. Then they ask to get rid of their health care and pension obligations, saying they don't have the funds to reclaim the land that they mined. These coal companies made promises to clean up their mines and protect their workers, but unfortunately, to me, it seems like they have broken their promises and may not be acting in good faith in some cases. Ms. Cromer, how do workers in the communities you serve react to these bankruptcy proceedings?
Thank you, Representative Levin. Yes, I completely agree that companies like Black Jewel are breaking their basic promises, and you're using the bankruptcy process to shield their executives. And that hit particularly hard where I am here in Letcher County, Kentucky. And the miners and the local government leaders and community members are and were angry because it seems that those executives are going to be able to just walk away from their responsibilities. And in addition, those miners and community members and local government leaders are really concerned because there's no backstop. There's no entity that's going to pick up the obligation those obligations that are going to be unfulfilled. But the ability of the miners to effectively respond is really limited by the bankruptcy process. And that goes for the local government leaders and impacted community members as well. They just have very little they have very little opportunity to affect change through bankruptcy. Bankruptcy courts don't lend themselves to participation by workers or by local governments or impacted community members. There are some exceptions where miners are represented by the United Mine Workers. They are often represented in bankruptcy, but most of our mines in Kentucky and Central Appalachia are not union mines, so that option is not available. In Black Jewel, there was another exception. The unpaid miners took some extrajudicial action and they blocked a coal train full of coal from leaving the prep facility there. And they were ultimately supported by the Department of Labor, who determined that that coal was hot goods and could not be sold in interstate commerce. And through that organizing and through their strategy, they were able to get their back pay. But again, that's the exception. And I mostly represent the community members, the landowners who are dealing with the landslides on their property and choked streams. And they have.
Let me ask you. I hate to cut you off, but I want to make sure we get through a couple more questions. And I thank you for what you said. As a community advocate, do you have recommendations for how OSMRE could better incorporate community and worker perspectives when it comes to bankruptcy or shoring up their bonds?
Yes, I do. I hope that OSMRE will start taking a much more active role in the coal bankruptcy process to oppose all attempts to sidestep SMACRA's enforcement and sidestep SMACRA's reclamation requirements. It's the coalville communities that are harmed, but as I was saying, they have almost no recourse through the bankruptcy process. And so OSMRE is in a position to be an advocate for those community members. So it should work with affected community members to bring those voices and those concerns to the bankruptcy judge, because those are just not heard during the bankruptcy process. And I think it's also important that OSMRE uses all of its processes to engage its citizens in any changes that are going on to the permit, any changes that are needed for bonding, any changes such as the closure of Kayenta mine that's being discussed. All of those need full citizen participation, and so it's on OSMRE to do more to engage citizens.
Thank you very much for that. With the time I have, Mr. Sarchik, in light of the shortcomings in the coal regulatory program you highlighted in your testimony, what do you see now as the most important duty of OSMRE, and how has that changed now that coal is in decline?
I see the most important duty is for OSMR to work as effectively as it can with the state career staff to minimize the damages of the mines with the declining industry. And I think they have the opportunity to take more action and be more assertive if that is not properly done, and to help the states to effectively implement their program, and where the states fail to do so, to pursue the options laid out by the law.
Thank you, Mr. Sarchik. I'm out of time. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Mr. Tiffany for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to address my first question to Mr. Nez. And you cite in here in your document, the complex bureaucracy in our federal government often stalls progress. Could you just flesh that out a little bit? Sounds like there was some frustration there in terms of federal regulations inhibiting what you would like to do.
Thank you very much, sir. As far as the Navajo Nation having difficulties with the federal government's laws and regulations, at this point, I understand that the 2 closures of Kayenta mine, as well as the NGS, we have sought the assistance of the federal government to intervene, and yet they were not there. They were absent to assist the Navajo Nation. And yet the Navajo Nation is still hurting from all the jobs lost. And hopefully we can continue to reach out and advocate on behalf of the Navajo Nation to work with the federal government to ease some of these laws and continue in the energy field as well, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nez. I appreciate that very much. It sounds like there's some real frustration, like many have, with the complex regulations that come down from the federal government. Ms. Horseherder, I thought I heard you say you would purchase electricity at less cost as a result of the mine being closed, because I'm sure it's a great concern in your community that you'd be able to continue to have affordable electricity. What were you guaranteed or promised there?
Ms. Horseherder, you're muted.
Yes.
There you go.
Representative Tiffany, in my testimony, I mentioned that the Navajo generating station shut down, and at the same time that the Central Arizona project for whom NGS was built was arguing that it could buy electricity at less than what it was buying at NGS. And that was my only reference to electricity. Do you want to, is that the question you were meaning to ask me?
Yeah, I got the impression from your testimony that you were assured that you'd get electricity at less cost. And I thought you used the number 30%, but I'm not sure of that. But I did hear you say that you'd be able to get electricity at less cost. Is that accurate?
No. What I was talking about is that the power from the NGS was no longer inexpensive, and that was the original reason that the NGS was so profitable. But the main purpose for which NGS was built was to bring power to the Central Arizona project so that it could deliver water to Central and Southern Arizona. And at the time that the NGS was coming to a close and the owners had announced that it would close the plant, the Central Arizona project was saying that we no longer can get electricity from the Navajo generating station at a cheaper cost than we can get on the open market. So we would like to purchase electricity from the open market instead of having to purchase from the Navajo generating station. It is no longer as cost effective as we could if we were to go out and just buy electricity from the open market. And they also cited that renewable energy was less costly for them. That was what I was referencing in my testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Horserter. Mr. Pizarchik, you stated in here in regards to, I believe it was SMACRA, the wanton land and water destruction were mostly stopped as a result of when SMACRA was put in place. Is that an accurate characterization that I'm reading here?
Yes, there was basically 200 years of unregulated coal mining that destroyed hundreds of thousands of acres, polluted tens of thousands of miles of streams, et cetera. And under the current regulatory program, the states and OSMR have done a much better job of protecting the land and restoring or reclaiming the land and water.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Chairman, am I running up against time?
You have run past time.
Okay, okay. I yield back.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tiffany. The chair now recognizes Ms. DeGette for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for stepping into the breach for this important hearing. And I want to thank all of the witnesses. My home state of Colorado has created an Office of Just Transition and an action plan to help communities and workers move towards a more prosperous future. And pretty soon, I'm going to be introducing a Clean Energy Innovation and Development Act bill. And in that bill, which is targeted to get to clean energy, we also have a workforce training and transition title based on this Colorado law. And the workforce title includes several measures to promote access to jobs in the modern energy economy, especially for workers in transition. And so what it does, it creates a new DOE Energy Workforce Transition Office to identify existing resources for displaced energy workers and communities. And it also provides financial and technical assistance to states to develop energy plans to address the workforce and economic transition, and also to establish apprenticeship, workforce development, and university leadership programs. So I'd like to start with you, Ms. Horserter, and ask you whether anybody from state or federal government has helped your community transition and locate new employment.
Thank you for that question, Representative DeGette. I am actually working both with the state of Arizona and the state of New Mexico to try to bring about transition and transition support and bring about renewable energy projects to the Navajo Nation. In the state of Arizona, we are working with the Arizona Corporation Commission and the utilities to try to provide some transition support to the Navajo Nation. The problem there is that the discussion, the conversation of just transition is still fairly new. It is not very well supported by the representatives in the state of Arizona. And so we have to continue these conversations in order for them to get better.
Let me just ask you, do you think it would be helpful if we had a federal program to particularly help you do that?
That would be tremendously helpful.
Okay. Thank you. And I see, Mr. Amsa, you're nodding your head. Can you also address that? You need to unmute your microphone, sir. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I back what Nicole Horseherder said. Our tribes, the Navajo and Hopi, we were hit with the NGS closure, so it impacted our economy. Then COVID came. There was another hit. So our people, the mine workers, are unemployed. Revenues to our tribes have stopped. So what is the alternative? And I think we have been trying to work with the state's utilities, Tucson Electric Power,
Right.
Arizona Public Service, to do just transition, have a few dollars, so that we can do something to offset our situation.
Yeah, and so if you had a federal program, that would probably really help you to make those plans. Is that right?
Absolutely, and if there would be,
Sir,
yes,
do you mind if I just move on? I have one more question and only a little over a minute left.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, so under my legislation, the owners and operators of energy-related facilities in the process of closing would have to file workforce transition plans to the new Clean Energy Transition Office. So I just want to ask you, Mr. Pizarczyk, would a workforce transition plan submitted 6 months before the closure of a coal facility be helpful to your agency?
If that was a regulated coal facility like a preparation plant or a mine, yes, that would be helpful. If it was a coal-fired power plant, that's outside of OSMER's jurisdiction.
I see. Okay. Now, Mr. Horseherder Ms. Horseherder, excuse me, did Peabody Coal give your communities any information like I described? Like, did you know how many jobs would be lost? And would that be helpful to have that information in advance?
Yes, so just to be clear, neither Peabody nor OSM provided any helpful information leading up to the mine's closure. It's actually the utilities that did a little bit better job of planning for closure and finding worker jobs. SRP promised a job for every single worker at the Navajo generating station who wanted one. Peabody made no such promises, so.
It would have helped. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Stauber for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair Huffman. Mr. Wentland, thank you for joining us today. Former Director Pizarczyk said in his testimony that Wyoming has allowed bankrupt companies to mine coal without a reclamation bond. Is this true?
Mr. Chairman, the statement that Wyoming mines operated without a reclamation bond is factually inaccurate. There was never a single day that Wyoming was out of compliance, as the self-bond claims were in place, and the state additionally negotiated priority positions in the bankruptcies, which were key. In addition, the self-bond and priority claims were not released until a suitable replacement bond was in place as part of the bankruptcy approved exit plans by the court. The state worked with and complied with the respective court orders, the Department of Justice, to resolve the bankruptcies and protect the interests of the state. All of the actions taken by Wyoming were found to be legal and in compliance with the court, SMACRA, and the Department of Justice.
Thank you, Thank you for that correction on some factual inaccuracies. I see in your testimony that Wyoming amended its self-bonding requirements recently. Why did the state of Wyoming choose to maintain the option for self-bond?
So the self-bond piece is part of the total portfolio for Wyoming. And Wyoming wanted to keep all of the options for bonding on the table. That includes self-bond, surety, real property collateral for us, cash instruments, etc. Because that diversification is what lowers the overall risk in the bond profiles.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. Chairman Nez, again, thank you so much for joining us today as a representative from the current Navajo government. Could you please describe the blow felt by losing 800 Native jobs in your community?
Thank you, Honorable Stauber. Yes, sir. Very painful, sir. An average plant worker, when NGS could open, expected to earn a salary with benefits worth $117,000 annually. But more importantly, this salary fed multiple families under the same household. It is not uncommon on the Navajo Nation that one job feeds multiple households for those that have had to leave the Navajo Nation to seek employment, such as relocation, is difficult in a culture where roots run deep and families often stay on the same land for generations. Our Navajo Nation government's gross income from coal revenue severely decreased and still have not found ways to replace the revenue in future fiscal years. Thank you, sir.
And so, Chairman Nez, so I just want to be clear. Prior to NGS closing, there was 800 Native jobs at this facility, and with an average of $117,000 per year. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And your if you reduce those job losses, the current average salary for your nation is now $20,005. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. The current rate for people that earn is approximately that amount, sir.
Okay. And so as in our entire discussion here, Chairman Nez, in your opinion, do you consider this a just transition?
Address transition. We see that only in terms of jobs and revenue lost from previous premature coal mine closures, but as stated in my testimony, the Navajo Nation is working responsibly to transition from coal-based economy to a new energy future. I cannot stress this point enough, sir. The Navajo Nation needs to be at the table when discussing energy future and transition of the United States. I want to stress the decision to close, decommission, and of the Navajo generating station was not an easy decision for many of my colleagues on the Navajo Nation Council. What is important to point out in this decision, our elected leadership were not part of the conversation about the energy transition until the decision was made for us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Nez. And Chairman Huffman, my time is up. I yield back. Congressman Tiffany will sit in my ranking seat for the remainder of this hearing. Thank you.
Very good. I thank the ranking member. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Mr. Bizarchik, the colloquy between some of my colleagues and Mr. Wentland has put you center stage. The substance that you've offered in your testimony has been challenged, and your veracity has been challenged. So let's give you a little bit of time to respond. And there's a few different threads here that I would invite you to speak to. One, it's been suggested that notwithstanding all these witnesses who have talked about the very real burdens and hardship that deadbeat coal companies have foisted upon the taxpayers and on struggling communities, that at least from the experience of Wyoming, This is just much ado about nothing. So I would invite you to tell us, is this a real problem, or is it much ado about nothing, as we have been invited to consider it in the Wyoming case? Second, it has been suggested that Wyoming was trying to be proactive and do everything right, and that you messed it up when you were in charge. So I'm going to invite you to speak to those two threads and anything else that you feel like deserves a rejoinder from your perspective.
Okay. First, the facts are that under the federal rules governing self-bonds, when a company becomes ineligible for that, it has to replace those bonds within 90 days. The coal companies in Wyoming became ineligible when they filed bankruptcy, perhaps before then, and they did not provide replacement bonds for about 17 months. They were, in essence, there was no bond posted by them pursuant to the SMACRA regulation, so they technically were mining without a bond. As far as the much ado about nothing, Wyoming has a unique circumstances compared to other states, and there are areas where they do a very good job. And but what's happening in Wyoming is not indicative of what happens in many other states with alternative bonding systems, with other types of geological challenges, et cetera, that are occurring in coal country. We are seeing coal companies who have exploited that. Now, let's just take two of the large companies in Wyoming. At the time, it was Arch and Peabody. One reason why they were somewhat successful is they had already spun off their liabilities back in the East for companies, and those companies formed another company, and with those liabilities that they got from those two companies, from Arch and Peabody, they were doomed to failure, and in fact did go into bankruptcy multiple times. So part of Wyoming has benefited from how the bankruptcy code has been exploited by large coal companies. And the problems that we're seeing with some of these bond programs, they're not everywhere, they're not in every state. But some of the states who have smaller programs or other programs, smaller mines, there are serious issues that have been identified out there. And I think Wyoming, if they've done what they've said about adjusting their bonds and diversifying, that is a very good thing to do, to diversify and have it. I commend them on that. As far as doing the regulations, well, OSMR has been understaffed under multiple administrations. From 2000 through 2013, OSMR lost 29% of its staff. Yet whenever more money was asked for by the administration, it was never appropriated, and OSMR has continued to lose staff. And OSMR simply does not have the staff to timely process program events or to do other statutory obligations. That is a fact that will continue to persist.
Thank you, Mr. Pisarcik. So I want to talk a little bit about this transition. Look, we know we can do this transition because we are doing it in some places. I look at the success story in Virginia, where the coalfield region has transitioned away from coal industries, begun investing in solar, and in 2019, solar jobs grew 15%. Today, there's far more solar jobs, double, in fact, as the number of coal jobs. And there are other success stories around the country. So in the time I have left, let me just ask Ms. Cromer, I imagine in Appalachia you have some successful transitions away from an economy based on coal towards a more sustainable and diversified economy. Could you just quickly share a few examples?
Certainly, Mr. Huffman. Thank you for that. And I'm actually in Virginia. I've lived in Virginia most of my life. Our offices are in Kentucky. So I'm aware of what's been going on in Virginia as compared with what's been going on in Kentucky. And yes, there are numerous exciting ideas and entrepreneurs who are working really hard to ensure that the transition away from coal in our region is just. But I just want to stress that because our region has been so dependent on this one industry for so long, and that industry has provided high wage jobs, there's no one idea, there's no one business that's going to be able to come in and ensure that that transition occurs. I would be happy, I see we're out of time, I would be happy to compile a list of some of the most promising strategies that we're seeing.
I would love to follow up perhaps in writing, and I apologize that we have run out of time, but I will pursue this further with you, and I thank you. With that, the chair now recognizes Ms. Harrell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time to Congressman Tom Tiffany.
Representative Tiffany, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Representative Harrell and Mr. Chair. A question for Director Wentland. Former Director Pizarczyk recommends in his testimony that self-bonds be replaced within 90 days. Is this timeframe feasible?
Mr. Chairman, the law requires the 90-day requirement. That's incorporated into Wyoming's regulations. With regard to Mr. Pizarczyk's rebuttal, we're going to have to agree to disagree on the situation in Wyoming with the bankruptcies and the self-bonds, because the bankruptcy court, the Department of Justice, and the Wyoming Attorney General simply do not concur with his assessment of that scenario.
Why do you think you're successful in Wyoming, but others say that you're not?
I think we're successful in Wyoming because we're proactive. We simply can't wait for OSM to act in most cases. The state acts in a manner to protect its own interests as quickly as possible, Mr. Chairman.
So did you recently update some regulations? Did I hear that correctly?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. We went through our regulations, and they were the new reclamation and financial assurance rules were signed into law by Governor Gordon in May of 2019.
Did you get any support from environmental groups?
Mr. Chairman, we did. In fact, due to the robust process where our rules go through a advisory board, then to our Environmental Quality Council, we do a massive engagement with the public. Maybe the best way to answer that question would be to read a statement from one of the environmental NGOs regarding our new rules. That statement is, and I quote out of the transcript from the September 19, 2018 meeting. We support the rule package. We think the staff's done a good job answering the questions, wrestling with these really complex and tough issues, and has crafted a solution that will protect the state and the taxpayers going into the future. So, Mr. Chairman, yes, we did receive broad support for the new rules.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Any interest in Wyoming coal from foreign interests or foreign countries at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I believe there is still an interest in offshore coal to some degree. It really comes down and depends on port space. And I believe the governor of Wyoming is continuing to pursue those potential issues.
So in the Obama-Biden administration, it became pretty common with the regulatory agencies to execute sue and settle, the practice of sue and settle. And some of the testimony that I've heard today, I'm getting a whiff that we may be seeing that again. Does that concern you that we're going to see the sue and settle practice rear its ugly head once again?
Mr. Chairman, I think the most important piece there is that the states have an active seat at the table in any of those actions. That's where we can be the most effective.
Yeah, and would you say that in your instance in Wyoming, as a result of being proactive and really having the interests of the people of the state of Wyoming at hand, that you've actually been more effective than what has been happening as a result of regulation from the federal government?
Mr. Chairman, that's an accurate statement, and I guess the best answer to that may be in looking at the administrative actions that OSMRE took during the bankruptcies with Wyoming. They were really counterproductive. We did receive a number of 10-day notices and then a new self-bond policy that former Director Pizarczyk has referenced today. And those really only served to, well, let me back up. None of those 10-day notices were found to have any legal merit. And the policy also was really not in line with cooperative federalism and Wyoming's primacy agreement. And really what those actions did was take really needed resources away from Wyoming in addressing the complexities of the bankruptcies. And Wyoming just simply could not wait for OSM to act, as I stated earlier. We needed to act quickly and protect our interests.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Representative Gosar for 5 minutes.
I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Gosar?
Can you hear me, Chairman?
Loud and clear.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say the appropriate title for this hearing would have been Justice for Coal Country when Democrat administrations kill jobs, then hold hearings to complain about job losses. But we're here today to hear various witnesses complain about job loss in the coal industry in Arizona and New Mexico that are the direct result of the Obama administration's war on coal. Now, the closure of Navajo Generating Station, while disappointing, wasn't what killed the jobs in this region. These jobs were killed by the Obama administration when they pulled the permits for the Desert Rock Energy Plant, which would have been run by the Dene Power Authority and the Navajo people. In 2009, the Obama administration withdrew valid permits for Desert Rock and refused to ever consider them. That project was on a path to be a state-of-the-art coal plant with aggressive carbon capture technology in the heart of an area that could directly use carbon capture for enhanced oil recovery in the Farmington area, and with the geological subsurface features needed for carbon sequestration. What a moment. That important project would have allowed our nation to test this important technology, which could have been exported from Arizona to the rest of the world. Imagine that. Desert Rock could have been a global center of research. A massive 1,500 megawatt power plant provided critical transmission capability to the entire region. But the Obama war on coal made sure that never happened. Mr. Nez, the Desert Rock Energy Plant would have built a 472-mile transmission line directly across Navajo Nation, not only providing a new electricity backbone to the Navajo Nation, but opening up opportunities for industrial-sized scale solar developments on the nation. Can you tell me, since Desert Rock project was canceled, was this transmission project built? And how much industrial scale solar has been built on the nation since 2009? Mr. Nez.
Thank you very much, Honorable Gosar. No, the transmission line associated with the Desert Rock Energy Plant was not built. Currently, the Navajo Nation has 2 utility solar plants operation on the Navajo Nation, the Kayenta 1 and Kayenta 2 solar plants, which were built by the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. NTUA is in the early stages of constructing a third 70 megawatts facility and a fourth 200 megawatts facility on the Great Navajo Nation. Thank you, sir.
So the 1,500 megawatt Desert Rock project killed by the Obama administration, and in the decades since, we have built about 55 megawatts of solar for the nation. We can and obviously need to do more. However, how much of a problem is the lack of transmission capacity, Mr. Nez?
Thank you, sir. The opportunity to construct more solar on the Navajo Nation is directly tied to location and availability of existing transmission assets and third parties that have rights to utilize such transmission, and the ability to secure solar energy power purchase agreement with those parties to deliver the energy to their markets for use. While more transmission is viable markets would be appreciated, but building for the sake of building does not benefit the Navajo Nation. The federal government and the Navajo Nation needs to ensure that such transmission is built with a preference for ensuring that renewable energy projects on the Navajo Nation would have a priority in the queue of such new transmission systems. Sir.
Yeah, so actively we look at green energy as being intermittent, and we need baseload power. So there's creative options that go with it. So this was a significant backdrop, not having a transmission line to connect these. Is that true? I take it you said yes. We haven't built nearly enough to replace the Navajo generation, certainly nowhere near enough to replace Desert Rock. And yet we have a White House that is continued bent on killing jobs by banning oil and gas development on federal lands, killing pipelines and killing mines, all for the promise of other jobs that we can see from this direct example never seem to come for people impacted on the ground in real life. Mr. Nez, in your testimony, you talk about the helium future for the Navajo Nation, and I agree that this is a critical component and desperately needed critical mineral. In addition, the Russian Federation is aggressively working to control the global helium market, and the Navajo Nation's development of your resources would be an important counter to Russian efforts. I hope to work with you as you develop these resources, and I hope that my colleagues question radical NGOs that come out to oppose this important development, knowing that Russia will do about anything to stop us from developing these natural resources. Mr. Wetland, can you
The
describe the
gentleman's time has
stakeholders?
expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank you, Mr. Gosar, and I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony today and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing under Committee Rule 3.0. Members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days. Following the hearing, the record will be held open for 10 business days to allow for responses. I also want to remind the witnesses that they are encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to their hearing invitation materials for further information about that. If there's no further business, then without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone.